Let me gavel in this work session. We are here at 11:10. The delay is entirely my fault. Let's introduce who we have present, starting with Mr. Peterson.
Pete Peterson.
Right? Yeah, we're going. Good.
Suzanne France.
Forrest Dunbar.
Felix Rivera.
Eric Croft.
Todd Sherwood. Law Department.
Dean Gates, City Council.
And we'll introduce you as you come up, and Mr. Weddleton just walked in. Great. So what we'd like to do is have Ms. Ingalls of the Sustainable Fabrics Council.
Sustainable Furnishings Council.
Furnishings.
Yes.
You can tell us about that and how it affects what we're considering here today. We'll have Pamela from ACAT give us a presentation, and then we will look at the language that we have and the language being considered by the state legislature and see if we want to adopt some of their approach or keep to our own or some combination. So Ms. Ingalls, thank you for being here. Take it away.
Thank you very much for having me here. And I'm calling in from North Carolina. My name is Susan Ingalls, and I'm Direct Sustainable Furnishings Council. We are a membership organization, and our members are companies that are involved in residential furnishings in various ways, so manufacturing products, supplying materials, stores where furnishings are sold, and interior design firms. And some of our members are there in Alaska and do business there in Alaska. And all of our members have made corporate commitments to sustainability and to transparency and to continuous improvement. And our members are very concerned specifically with reducing the use of harmful chemicals in their product lines, in the product lines that they are selling in their stores and specifying for their clients. We are pleased to be working an initiative with our friends at the American Sustainable Business Council that we call the What's It Made Of initiative, which is to encourage transparency in our very complex supply chains and to stimulate innovation towards the elimination of the harmful chemicals most commonly found in furnishings. And that, of course, includes flame retardant chemicals. Flame retardant chemicals are overly common in furnishings products. We have about 400 member companies, and they have signed a pledge to ask what's it made of as a way of beginning to stimulate this elimination of harmful chemicals like flame retardants. So why are we as an industry so concerned about these things? We are concerned because people generally think the government is keeping them safe and that anything they could buy walking into a furniture store is going to be perfectly safe for them. We know better than that, and consumers, as they begin to do any research, know better than that. And so more and more consumers know better than that, and they are very concerned with what might be in their furnishing products. So, the 400 member companies that we've got are doing their best to keep flame retardants out, to avoid flame retardants. It is not so easy to do. These things are sometimes insidious and in a piece of furniture before the retailer, for instance, has a chance to specify its absence. So it would be better for the consumers and for the businesses if these things were outlawed altogether.
So Ms. Ingalls, I appreciate that. So two basic questions. I think this is an easy area. Maybe I was confused at first. First of all, why not put a flame retardant on my furniture? Sounds like a good idea in case my house goes up. And then, so why is it does it have a flame retardant, a significant flame retardant effect? So are they effective? And then the contrary-wise, how do I know that they're dangerous? That is, even if it doesn't provide much flame retardant effect, why is it important to get them out? How do we know they're dangerous? So 2 questions.
Okay. Why not put it on? Because one, it is not very effective in actually retarding flames. And this is demonstrated by lots of different research, a lot of it done by firefighters who are especially concerned about the level of sickness that they are falling prey to because of their high exposure to these flame retardant chemicals. There are also more and more incidences of diseases that people are getting when they are children. So there's more and more evidence of children being affected. Children are more susceptible to the bad effects of exposure to toxins, and we are seeing that more and more these days. So what are the effects these poor little children are suffering? In some cases it's obesity, in some cases it is endocrine disruption. Some cancers are being linked to flame retardant chemicals, and this is actually what the firefighters are most encountering is various cancers. But the children are suffering in the very long term. For you all there in Alaska, there is added concern in the fact that these harmful chemicals are persistent, and as chemicals move around as persistent chemicals move around our planet, they often end up in the cold places, so in the Arctic. And so these persistent chemicals are ending up in creatures that never sat on a couch, whales, polar bears, etc. There are more of them ending up in Arctic areas because of the way the flow is of moisture in atmosphere, and the way our atmosphere moves around. Further, you in Alaska are indoors a lot more than we in North Carolina are, for instance, and so you are further exposed through breathing in dust that is coming from the foam on your sofa, for instance.
Okay, that was...
So that's a little bit of rambling on about some of the health effects.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And it combined a lot of things. I have a couple of questions from other members of the Assembly here, which I'll recognize in a second. So are you and your entity convinced that the fire retardant value is relatively small?
We are. We're convinced that it's negligible. We know that furniture can be made fire safe with better choices of materials for the upholstery covering of a sofa, for instance. It is not going to necessarily keep the fire from happening if there are flame retardants squirted all over the sofa, and it is likely to keep the fire from happening if that sofa is covered in wool upholstery, for instance, as a simple example, because it is naturally flame retardant. Just doesn't catch fire as quickly.
Yeah, I saw in the documentary that they were doing those tests, and it didn't do much change at all. Are the alternatives that provide fire as much or more fire retardant capability without the use of chemicals, are they very costly? That is it going to make my couch a lot more expensive?
No, it is not necessarily going to make your couch more expensive. There are choices you as a consumer could make that would add cost, but it is not necessarily going to be more expensive.
Okay. Mr. Peterson, and then I'll get back in line. So this is Mr. Peterson, who's also on the assembly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Ms. Engel, you mentioned that this caused obesity in children, and
Yeah.
I just wondered what the connection is to cause obesity.
I know that from Dr. Heather Stapleton at Duke University, who is the scientific authority that I am not. So I will have to refer you to studies that other people have done, because I'm not the scientist, but I do trust the scientists like Dr. Heather Stapleton at Duke University. Let me see. Do you need more information than that? Fairly, I wish I had it at my fingertips.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and so me and then Mr. Rivera. So what about availability? So we're kind of at the end of a supply chain
Right.
here. Are we, if we do something like this, are we as consumers and are the businesses that sell us furnishings going to be able to find adequate supplies on the West Coast, or that we use of
Yes.
furnishings and rugs and things like that that don't have these chemicals?
Absolutely. There are, so as I mentioned, there are 400 member companies at Sustainable Furnishings Council, and those do include many companies doing business in Alaska. Crate and Barrel, all the Williams-Sonoma group, so that's Pottery Barn and West Elm, etc. Mitchell Gold and Bob Williams, and Scan Home and IKEA. So the big ones do have this commitment and are able to provide you with all the furniture you need without adding flame retardant chemicals.
Great. And then I have Mr. Rivera and Ms. LaFrance from the Assembly. So Mr. Rivera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Vice Chair Rivera.
So, Riviera, actually.
Riviera.
Ms. Angela, I just want to continue the line of questioning that Mr. Croft started regarding the alternatives. Could you specify a little bit more about those alternatives, and do we see those alternatives in products already?
Yes. Yes. So the store, we do see these in products already. The stores that I mentioned are able to offer you a full line of full product line without adding flame retardant chemicals.
Thank you.
Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So it sounds like many of the sellers and vendors are opting in for safer products, and I don't know if you have information as far as how quickly that's happening. One of the carryover questions we had from our discussion last time concerns the prevalence of such products being sold within the municipality, and that may be a question that needs to wait, but we just went through a prolonged discussion about banning plastic bags, and one of the issues was the number of supplies of bags that merchants still had on hand. And so I'm wondering about this approach, which gives a January 1, 2020 date. And is this enough time to, well, see, I'm a little bit uncomfortable because on the one hand, if we know something is dangerous, it's not like we want to quickly get it out there. I mean, ideally, these would not be sold, but on the other hand, you've got merchants and vendors who have invested in this inventory. And so I'm wondering if you have specific feedback on how to handle any kind of phasing in or rolling out, or what kind of approaches that SFC has suggested for handling that.
Yeah. I do think you're smart to be thinking in terms of a phase-in period. I think that January 1st, 2020 would be plenty of time, given that there are plenty of products available now, and the major retailers in your state are already offering products that are flame retardant free, and furniture stores buy new furniture, choose new inventory once or twice a year. Store owners, store buyers even come to North Carolina from Alaska. They usually only come once a year, but they do come once a year. So that means that anything that they have on their floor now, they will have replaced it by January 1st, 2020.
Any other assembly? I don't see assembly member questions. One last question for me, and then we'll move to the presentation here locally. You're welcome to stay on or go off and do anything else you want there.
Thank you.
Yeah, you have my permission. Didn't firefighters push for some of these to be on products in the 60s and 70s?
No. As far as I know, it was not the firefighters' idea. Rather, it was the tobacco company's idea. I do not know of firefighters wanting more chemicals on furniture. Furniture is, polyurethane foam, which is in much furniture, is a petroleum product. It is therefore a fuel source, but when it burns, the smoke that it emits is harmful in itself. And I don't know of firefighters specifically asking for more chemicals to be put on. So sorry, I don't know of that. All I know of is the tobacco industry wanting the foam to be made more fire safe in order for people to be able to smoke in bed. But it did not happen that this particular chemical achieved that fire safety.
Yeah, firefighters and fire departments are pretty unified now in wanting these things out because of the danger to firefighters and the lack of efficacy. I think in the early 70s, when these were being put on as part of the tobacco industry's response to deaths from falling asleep with cigarettes or other house fires, that some fire departments got roped into supporting it. But no, I think you were
well,
right.
Good. Thank you for clarifying that for me.
Yeah, well, that's just what I learned from the documentary, so we can both find out. Thank you, Ms. Ingalls, very much. Did you have anything you wanted to wrap up with?
Well, I want to thank you for your concern and interest in this. I think that I appreciate your taking responsibility for keeping your citizens safe, and I think that that is what more and more cities need to be doing around the country, cities and states. And as you know, the Consumer Product Safety Commission is moving in this direction, but it's going to be a while before we have federal regulations that we expect. And so I really appreciate y'all taking this initiative. Thank you.
Well, back at you. Thank you for having us have alternatives in the marketplace so that when we decide to do this, there are places we can go to have these things. Okay,
Yeah.
we'll appreciate it. You can remain on or do as you like. Miss Miller, come on up here.
Wow, thank you.
Great. You have a presentation for us?
Yes.
Thank you for
I'll
being
keep
here.
it very brief.
Okay. You want?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Assembly. My name is Pamela Miller, and I'm a biologist by training and the Executive Director of Alaska Community Action on Toxics, and we're engaged in doing community-based research on the long-term exposures and health effects of people living in the North and how these chemicals affect health over the long term. This is just a brief slide about our organization. We've been in existence for just over 20 years, and we do community-based research, education, outreach, and work on policy change to help establish more effective and protective laws for our citizens. So I thought that this presentation might be helpful in just getting us all to a common understanding of what flame retardants are, what some of their biological and human health effects are, the market considerations that Ms. Inglis spoke about, and also economic concerns. So I'll try to cover all of this in a fairly brief presentation. And she covered some of this, but these were added to products beginning in the 1970s. They have largely proved to be ineffective. They make the home environment, because they leach out of products and glom onto household dust. Children are very vulnerable because they're playing on the floor, they're very highly exposed, and their levels of exposure are sometimes 5 to 7 times higher than adults living in the same household. These chemicals do have a range of health effects, including endocrine effects, and that's the connection with obesity. They affect the endocrine system. But they're also neurodevelopmental toxicants. They can cause cancer and a whole range of health effects. And as Ms. Inglis spoke about, they really have no proven fire safety benefit, which is why we've really had the widespread support of the firefighting community, the Fire Chiefs Association. I'll be talking a little bit more about that later.
Why would children have 5 to 7 times more? If we're in the same household, why would a baby in the household have that much more?
There's several reasons. One is they're playing on the floor. They're doing the hand-to-mouth behavior. And they're smaller. Their bodies are smaller, so they're intaking more air, water, and food. They're getting a lot of the exposure from their hand-to-mouth behavior. Yeah. So this was the finding of the Consumer Product Safety Commission in late 2017. And this is really significant because they essentially determined that manufacturers, importers, and retailers should stop selling products containing this whole class of organohalogen flame retardants because of all these adverse health effects that are listed here, and I won't go over them again. But they also acknowledge the special vulnerability of children. They are proceeding with a rulemaking, but we know that that will be years down the line. They've made these very strong guidelines and recommendations to retailers and manufacturers, but the rulemaking is in progress. And they especially issued warnings concerning children's toys, childcare articles, mattresses and mattress pads, upholstered household furnishings, and the plastic casings of electronics, because these products have especially high levels of flame retardants. And again, Ms. English touched on this issue. The North and the Arctic are a hemispheric sink for these chemicals because they are so highly persistent. They persist in the atmosphere and the ocean environment. They're carried on prevailing wind and ocean currents into the North. So our fish, wildlife, and people of the North have higher levels of these chemicals than other places on the planet. These are endocrine disrupting chemicals. I've covered some of these points, so I won't make them again. We've done some studies of these chemicals on St. Lawrence Island in particular, and it is true that people have higher exposures in the North because of our position on the planet, as well as the fact that we do spend more time indoors. And there have been studies, and one of the most recent ones in 2018 show that once we eliminate these chemicals from products, that the body burden or the exposure levels go down considerably. And there was one study in particular that I highlighted here at the bottom, a 2018 study that shows that there was up to a 90% reduction in flame retardant exposures in children that were in daycare centers when nap mats were simply replaced with products that don't contain, with nap mats that don't contain flame retardants. So that's a very dramatic reduction in a serious exposure to neurodevelopmental toxicants. So I see this ordinance, if we can go forward with this, as really a preventive measure to protect children, to protect firefighters. These are some of the ways we are exposed, and we've covered some of this already. You see Mayor Berkowitz here because when he was a legislator, he participated in a biomonitoring study, and he had the highest levels of anyone that participated in this study nationally. And there were about 60 people from 10 different states that participated in this study. And we do think that it is because, again, he lives in the north, eats foods that are from the land and sea here, and also
Poor
because of the
hand-to-mouth control.
yeah, it's because he's not here to defend himself, so we probably shouldn't talk about him any further. But and I'm sorry. Yes.
I'm just wondering, how do they measure that for people that participate in the study?
Sure.
Is it a blood test?
They can be measured in blood, in urine, and in the case of Mayor Berkowitz, we took both kinds of samples, and he reminds me of that every time I see him. They can be measured in hair, they can be measured in fingernails, but the best test of your internal exposure and what might be affecting your endocrine system is looking at levels in blood serum. We've talked a little bit about the also vulnerability of firefighters and the fact that these flame retardants are largely ineffective and they make fires more toxic, which is really why the firefighting community has gotten on board in support of local and state and national regulations to try to get flame retardants out of these products. When they burn, they create very highly toxic dioxins and furans and soot, and we know that the firefighting community has higher incidences of a whole range of cancers, including testicular cancers, 101% higher levels of testicular cancers in firefighters than the general population, and also multiple myeloma and a whole range of reproductive cancers as well. And a recent study of women in the firefighting force in San Francisco showed that they had 6 times the rate of breast cancer than the general population. So this is why this is an occupational health and safety issue for firefighters. This is why firefighters have gotten involved in these issues, whether on a local or state level. And we're very pleased that our local fire chief, Jody Hedrick, is very much in support of local and state legislation that would phase these chemicals out of products because it makes for a safer firefighting environment. This is a little bit about the historic context. One of the significant reasons why the market is moving away from the use of flame retardants in furnishings is because it's kind of an obscure law that was passed in California called TB 117, which initially, back in the 70s, required the use of chemical flame retardants, but it was amended in 2013 to say that manufacturers could meet fire safety standards and can achieve fire standards by the construction and the use of materials rather than the use of chemical flame retardants. That really transformed the market, so that I think is in part why the market is moving away. The case of children's pajamas, some of these flame retardant chemicals were used in children's pajamas. They were found to be both mutagenic and cancer causing, so they were largely removed. But some of those same flame retardants then began to be used in furniture and children's products. So that's the irony. But again, I think the market, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, is moving away from the flame retardants. This was a really important expose that was done by the Chicago Tribune a couple of years ago, and they did a series of articles that were really, really excellent that exposed the chemical industry for trying to influence and present false testimony before state legislatures. And this particular individual is Dr. David Heimbach, who is a retired burn surgeon, and he actually came to Alaska and gave testimony to our legislature that was later proven to be false. And his medical license has been removed, and he was really exposed for his connection to and being paid for by the chemical industry through this fake organization called Citizens for Fire Safety. But it was really, the organization was really the 3 major manufacturers of flame retardants. So it's much the same playbook as the tobacco industry has used over the years to try to give deceitful evidence and testimony about these products. States and local governments are taking the lead because things are not happening fast enough at the federal level to protect public health. So this is just a slide to show local ordinances in these jurisdictions and state policies that have been adopted in 13 different states, with 40 policies currently being considered. So this is a wave of efforts by local and state governments to take proactive action to protect their own citizens, and especially the people who are most vulnerable, that is children and firefighters. This is a long list of retailers that have made commitments to or have already phased out flame retardants, and you see many of these are located here in Alaska. So we have a lot of options, and the market is moving away. I think manufacturers as well as retailers are recognizing that people and consumers are demanding safe products. They want products labeled. They want to have assurance that these products are safe.
So these are ones that have it in there, like I can find it at Walmart, or Walmart will only do safe stuff that doesn't have flame retardants?
They've made a commitment to phase out flame retardants in their products.
Okay, so this list is not just can find, but these people or these entities are only doing it.
Right.
Okay. Or moving that way in any way. Yeah.
Yes.
Can I follow up?
Yeah, yeah.
And do you know offhand how many have not been? I mean, again, to the question of the prevalence of products here.
Right. We've done some initial surveys, and maybe Sue, and I should acknowledge my colleagues Sue Chan and Jessica Kim, who helped prepare this presentation as well. And we've been doing some surveys of local businesses and checking the products. And by and large, couches are almost completely 100% flame retardant free. They're required to be labeled because of the TB 117113 law in California, and generally those have no added chemical flame retardants. There are some chairs, bar stools in particular, that we found that still have flame retardants. This was at the Fred Meyer store, right? But by and large, furniture is labeled because of the TB 117 law and free of chemical flame retardants.
So is the holdout rugs? Where is it most prevalent now?
In furniture, I would say some imported products. Mostly couches are going flame retardant free. Like I said, some chairs, but it's really kind of irregular. And if Susan is still on, maybe she can help answer that question.
Susan is still on. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead and answer that. That'd be great. Thank you.
Good. A lot of the flame retardants have been moved from the foam to the fabrics, and it is not always apparent. The retail buyer is not necessarily going to know that unless they ask their suppliers very precisely about it. So it isn't something, they're going to say what the fiber content of that upholstery material is, but they're not necessarily going to be listing as automatic product information that it does have chemicals in it for retarding flame. But it is sometimes put in the fabrics. Now, with California's TB 117-2013, the kind of test that was used to test the flame retardancy of furniture changed, and that inspired some companies to start putting flame retardant chemicals on the textiles.
Mr. Weddleton had a question.
Join the thought, I guess, if
Speak
you've
up.
got a chemical that doesn't seem to do the job, and it would cost money for these companies to add it to their products. So there's no real demand for it. There's no reason to say, hey, my soap is better than the other guys because I have this chemical on it. So do we even need a law? I mean, it's like just tell them, hey, you don't have to use this. So the companies make more money. They can market it as my soap is great because we don't have these extra chemicals. It just seems like the industry's already going that way. we're late to the game. This could have happened 50 years ago, but now
Yeah.
people figured out we're moving on.
I think that's a good question. However, the pattern of compliance and consistency is not there. And so consumers do not have, I think, the assurance that products are present without flame retardant additives. So I think it's an important kind of consumer right to know and consumer protection law that local and state governments take action. And I think that's bolstered by the findings of the Consumer Product Safety Commission. Also, with a lot of children's products and toys, for example, those are not required to be labeled at all. So a law like this, an ordinance in Anchorage, can really help, I think, force disclosure, force the right to know, again, so consumers, if you're a parent, you don't, right now, if you go to a store, you don't know with many products whether or not they, whether they contain chemical flame retardants. And we've done some testing of toys, for example, that have found very high levels of flame retardants. I think the furniture industry is moving a lot faster, as Susan has talked about, but children's products in general are not necessarily moving as fast, and consumers, especially parents, don't have that level of assurance.
Well,
Yeah, keep going. Yeah.
maybe so, but I mean, why are they putting this expensive chemical on their product? Tell them you don't have to do that anymore. I'm out of there. I'll save you money.
I have a response to that question about why they're putting it on. They're frequently, it is the seller, the chemical company, that is managing to sell it somewhere down this very complex supply chain. So now they're not putting it in the foam so much. That's good news. But since there is concern that the cover, the upholstery fabric that goes over the foam, it's going to be fire. It's going to be the protection from the fire. The people making the fabric might be vulnerable to a sell from a fiber company that says this fiber is going to weave you, make it possible for you to weave a fabric that is fire safe, without mentioning that the way it got there is by adding chemicals that are harmful and may or may not do the job.
So is part of the answer to Mr. Weddleton's question that these are advertised as more safe, fire safe, when really the studies don't support that, but you had this relatively cheap chemical and you're able to say something about fire on your product?
Yeah, that is being done, and it is far from the consumer. It's down the complex supply chain.
And I think the chemical manufacturers have wanted to create a market for this for their own economic benefit rather than the benefit of consumers. So they've tried to make the claim that these chemicals contribute toward fire safety when in fact scientific studies show that they do not, and they make fires more toxic and the home environment more toxic. So they have created the market, and I see many similarities with the tobacco industry. Quite
So I didn't
frankly,
mean to cut you off, Mr. Weddleton. Were you done?
Well, maybe I'm just trying to say I have a small business. I have people trying to sell me stuff all the time. And I say, well, I don't need that. I'm buying it. Why would I spend the money on that? So, and I am certain that these manufacturers are sophisticated enough to say no to many, many people. So if a chemical company came up and says, hey, you should put this in your furniture, no. So I think maybe there's a slight advantage. I'm trying to look, what is the advantage here?
Right.
So if they can label it, hey, this is flame retardant, and maybe mom's more likely to buy it over the other version, maybe that's a reason.
And I think it's only been recently that the flame retardant cell job versus the chemical-free cell job has become in an equilibrium. So I have Mr. Gates and then Mr. Peterson, right? Yeah,
Right.
Mr. Gates.
Thank you. So, Mrs. Miller, earlier you, in your presentation, said that these were additives in order to meet flammability standards. And I guess I didn't catch where those flammability standards originate, where they are, where we can find them. Is it a federal regulation? I got the impression it was a California flammability standard. So why don't we leave that in California? We don't need that standard in Alaska or anywhere else in the country.
Yep.
So why are all the manufacturers following California family standard? And I kind of get that they search for a way to satisfy the standard, finding some in the manufacturing process affordable, efficient products to add to their manufacturing process to meet the flammability standard. Where's the standard from?
California, and I'm sorry, and will you send to Dean both the original California from the 70s and the revised one from 2013? Plus, I think there was a report that California did along the way saying why they were changing, maybe a couple of reports that Sue has shown me. But yeah, we'll get all that for you, Dean.
Is that the technical bulletin 117? That's
Yes.
the flammability standard?
Yes, and the reason that outdated law, the outdated TB 117 law that was passed in the 70s was amended as TB 117 2013 was because studies showed that fire safety standards could be met without the addition of chemical flame retardants. So the reason also that California relatively obscure technical bulletin could drive the sort of federal market at the federal level was because California is such a hugely populous state. And Susan, you may want to add something additionally.
Yes, it is a very large market, and so that is the thing. It is a large market. So when furniture companies are preparing products for warehousing and for shipping all over the country, they do pay attention to what they have to do to ship things to California. And the fact that California now requires that labeling law, which came on in 2015, has increased awareness among consumers. And this sort of goes back, it's increased awareness among consumers across the country, and though that label only has to be on furniture in California, consumers in other states, some consumers in other states know to look for it and are more and more concerned if it says there are chemicals added to make that piece of furniture flame safe. Fire safe. This does go back to that question that we had earlier about the phase in time, and it goes back to something else that has come up, that the chemical companies do have a lot of chemicals they would like to keep selling. So those chemicals are sold into more obscure parts of the supply chain, and so become more hidden in the actual piece of furniture that you or I might walk into a furniture store to buy. And I do think that January 1st, 2020 is plenty of time for retailers to have turned over their inventory. I also think that on January 1st, 2020, there will still be some of these flame retardant chemicals in the world being sold into components that could be made into furniture.
So Mr. Peterson, then we're going to ask you to wrap up, Ms. Miller.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so the situation we find ourselves in as a municipality is that the federal government, Congress, seems to be dragging their feet on legislation to ban these harmful chemicals. And so you're attempting an end run by going to state governments and municipalities to have these regulations enacted. And so when I was originally contacted about this, I thought this would be something that would be more effectively done at the federal level, but it seems like maybe the chemical companies have a little more influence at the federal level, and so the reason you're coming to us is because you found that you're able to be more successful in getting these enacted than you are back east.
Yes, and that's a very good question, and I think it is, from our perspective, really possible for local and state governments to make progress toward protecting the health of our own citizens in advance of action at the federal level when things are kind of dysfunctional, I'll say it, at the federal level, and that we can make more rapid progress toward this, and then that helps to inspire and bolster and maybe quicken action at the federal level if local and state jurisdictions are taking these measures to protect their own citizens.
Thank you, great.
So I'll wrap this up real
Okay.
quick, okay? Just very briefly, this is some progress that has been made on legislation. Legislation on flame retardants was first introduced in the state legislature in 2008. I think more recently we've made rapid progress. Representative Tarr introduced House Bill 27 and made progress in the legislature last session with passage through the House Resources Committee on a bipartisan basis. We received lots of support. The City of Anchorage has become a part of this Healthy Babies Bright Futures program, which is a program to look at ways that we might work together to reduce children's exposures to neurodevelopmental toxicants. Senator Murkowski at the federal level has recognized the vulnerability of firefighters in looking and establishing a firefighter disease registry. And just last week, Murkowski led a bipartisan effort to urge the CDC and the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry to prioritize studies on health effects to firefighters. This is just briefly what we hope this ordinance would accomplish, that it would phase out the chemicals that we know are causing harm to children and firefighters. These are the flame retardants that we have especially good scientific information on. These are the flame retardants that the Consumer Product Safety Commission is recommending be taken out of products. And I'll end by just saying that there's a lot of support for this from organizations of healthcare professionals, the All Alaska Pediatric Partnership, the Governor's Council on Disabilities and Special Education. I mentioned the firefighters and the fire chiefs. This is for the state legislation, but we also enjoy support for this, and I know that if this were to come to a hearing before the Assembly, that a number of these organizations would be very glad to come and testify in support. So I don't know if we have time to show this funny John Oliver video about this very topic today, but he actually had, I think, a very poignant segment on his show. We can tee it up if there's time.
It's worth it. It's 5 minutes.
It's about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
We can tee it up. And again, this is just kind of the business case for phasing out these flame retardants. A lot of this is already covered.
John Oliver.
Oh, and we'll get back to John Oliver. And these are some of the reasons why we think that getting these flame retardant chemicals out is actually good for business and makes business sense. And I think Susan covered a lot of that really well. But I think some other examples that we can look to with regard to public health, getting lead out of fuel, tremendous impacts on increasing children's IQ over the time that lead was phased out. And I really think of, as a biologist, of flame retardants as the new lead because they have many of the same neurodevelopmental effects. The smoking bans that we've enjoyed, getting bisphenol A out of plastic products. So these are just some examples that we can look to that have shown direct public health benefits when you remove exposures to harmful substances. And I will end there. So thank you very much. I really appreciate your time today. Want to see John Oliver? Jessica, you want to help me? Okay. Just go back to the link.
If there's a closed caption link, can you try to click on it?
This one. This is really worth it.
Do you know if this one's closed?
Can you check if
captioned?
there's a closed caption link? Try clicking on it. We'll see.
Oh, closed caption here.
There's no sound. You can't on that. Okay, so we should be on.
We don't seem to have sound.
need to covering for Becky. She's like 2 moves, so there's no sound.
Well, if we don't have sound, you can send the link to people.
Can I ask a question while they're doing-
Actually, I think I'm going to stop the fiddling. So why don't you just send them the link, Mr. Weller?
Got here a little late, so maybe I missed something. So we have two versions here. One is like Title 15, Title 16.
Yeah, what I hope to get to and what we've filibustered ourselves out of is a comparison of the original and the state law. So Mr. Gates, are these two different or just two different formatted? One's an edit on the AO?
So I think you have one that's got like a gray column on the left side, and that's an earlier draft where we had some comments from the ACAP staff, Mr. Miller, Mr. John, and thought that would be beneficial for you to see how our editing went and what some of the comments were, especially from Ms. Miller, for example, on the last page. She says we don't need that subparagraph 4 about capital technical votes and not really. That was explicit, I don't know. Well, and then the other document is our most recent draft.
That incorporates these changes?
It includes some of the changes. So I had hoped to, I'm sorry, I planned to meet with them on Monday, but I was out sick, so I didn't get to do that. And that was the goal, was to go over some of the things I included and didn't include, update our draft. So we want to see it, but I didn't get to that point. So it will probably include some more changes, definitely, about and going over some of the more technical.
So do you want us to work off this or the gray draft or some other draft?
I want you to move from the one with no gray column.
And then,
Got
got it. And do you have the House bill in front of you?
the most recent November drafted House Bill.
1129.
I saw that this morning before we started our meeting.
Version A, draft A. Yeah, let's, anyway, 1129 on the upper right, version A, they usually go by the alphabetical one. I want to ask you, I don't know if you had enough time, to tell us the major differences between the two. What Ms. Miller put up at the end is we want to have a ban of certain chemicals and a labeling of some description of the risks. And I want to understand how these two versions, the state and the local, do that in different ways and which are preferable, because I want to get a good draft for us. Mr. Dunbar, did you have something?
No, let's do that first.
So have you had long enough to look at the state current draft, Mr. Gaines?
I had looked at HB 27 from last year, which didn't move forward, it didn't pass. But so some of the ordinance draft is, when I first started this ordinance drafting project, I cobbled together about good parts of the State House Bill 27 last year, the San Francisco ordinance, and the Washington DC ordinance. I saw them as fitting together well in terms of also fitting with their own code, being able to enforce it, making some sense in terms of how it would be enforced locally on the local level. So some of the bigger differences, I guess.
I asked if you had a chance. I asked if you had a chance to look at this.
The 1129?
Yeah.
No, I just got that just before we started our work session. I did note, though, that they provided us the legal services memorandum that reviewed this 1129 bill. And one part that I'm going to quick skim stood out is they recommended removing the labeling requirement. So we had a labeling requirement in our draft ordinance, but I checked with the House last year.
Let me ask.
I guess that based on that minimum for legal services, maybe we should take it out, but I wouldn't make it.
The answer is no.
Okay.
No, I'm just asking. And then, how much difference is there between last year's HB 27 that Mr. Gates looked at and this new draft? Lots?
I think the major difference is that the current version that will be pre-filed by Representative Tarr is more inclusive of additional flame retardant chemicals for which we have good scientific evidence, and that California instituted a ban on just about a month ago. There was a state law passed in California. So the idea is to try to harmonize with that.
Lots, none, or some?
It includes organohalogens plus organophosphate. So the reason for this is that what the chemical industry commonly does is go through a process of regrettable substitutions. So we're trying to avoid that by taking a class approach to these chemicals to include those flame retardants, organohalogens, organophosphates, organonitrogen-based flame retardants that we have very good evidence cause harm. So
I didn't ask what the changes were. I asked whether they were substantial.
that's the substantive change there, sir. And I should say also, I would defend the labeling requirement, and I think Representative Tarr is going to include it because we've made the case that this is a consumer right to know issue, and she, I think, understands that and would like to keep the labeling requirement in, and we would as well.
Okay, so I just put it to come to you to the work session. What is people's thoughts on the best way for us to get a draft that reflects what we want to do or think we want to do, or the best of these things? Mr. Dunbar.
Yeah, I have a couple of things on that. So first I'll just say, and you know this better than I, Mr. Croft, but I would not be fully persuaded by some of the news by legislative people. There are some talented people there too, but I've gotten some truly off-base memos before. I had one thing that said something was unconstitutional. The person had never done criminal law before. It was remarkable. So persuasive, perhaps persuasive, but don't let a legal memo from legal services be controlling. I am inclined with my co-sponsors, if they're on board with me, to submit this or something close to this for the first meeting in January on the agenda.
By which you mean our version that we have here, or the state law?
Our version we have here. The next meeting is January 15th, which is a little ways out. So if we want to do a little more tinkering with it before we put it on the agenda, I think that's fine. I know Mr. Gates probably needs to do a little more work on it. Submit it on the 15th. Public hearing in January. And the reason I want to get this going forward is because this work session I thought was going to be a presentation about the outreach that had been done to the retailers and what the impact on them would be. And that remains to me the most important point. But I think we've experienced in the past with a couple of our ordinances that some people don't really start paying attention until it's actually on the agenda. And then we'll get a groundswell of people being, well, yeah, that too. I'm hopeful that if it goes on the agenda, and maybe there's a KTVA story or something like that, Ashley's Furniture, and actually I found out yesterday or last week, like all the furniture stores are owned by the same company, or like most of them are owned by the same out-of-state company. But they will come to probably a subsequent work session or a public hearing and tell us what is right or wrong with this. And then we can kick it another week meeting and do whatever reasons we need. But my inclination is to get this show on the road.
Like that. Comments from other assembly members? Yeah, Mr. Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is there a list of all the products that have these kind of chemicals in it that might have an effect on people other than children, or have an effect on all of us?
Well,
I'm not sure who to ask that question to.
Ms. Ingalls, are you still on?
I am, but I'm sorry, I did not hear the question very well. Could you repeat it, please?
Is there some master list of products that have these chemicals on and products that don't? I assume the entities within your umbrella organization would be the ones that don't. Is there lists of the ones that do and ones that don't?
All the major furniture retailers are moving away from them. The way that you are most liable to encounter these and other harmful chemicals when you buy furniture that is not that is an off-brand or that is not branded by the company that is selling it. So they're not taking responsibility for what it was actually made of. But there are various harmful chemicals, these flame retardant chemicals being a major one. There are various harmful chemicals in so many furnishings and other consumer products, and a good way to protect ourselves as consumers is buy from companies that have publicly taken a stand and taken responsibility. It takes some work to get down in their very complex supply chains, and that work is helped when there are laws. When there is legislation, it makes it harder for the harmful chemicals to be hidden in there because it's they're sharper eyes looking for it.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
No, but I'm getting used to it. Ms. Riddleton, and then we started about 10 minutes after, and we are ending about 10 minutes after. But what did you have?
Just an interesting point. I don't know where we fit in this, but when I did a show at the Design, one of the rules was that if you have a tapestry or something like that, it must you have to show them that it is flame retardant. And if we show that we bought a can of stuff to spray on it, they would accept that.
Weird. Okay, so Mr. Gates, what Mr. Dunbar said, which is we'd like to have a draft, either this or a cleaned up version of this that would go on the January 15th for first reading, and then we'd have time to maybe incorporate other aspects of it, get community input when they really feel like it's coming, and action sometime maybe later January. Does that work for you, sir?
Oh, I think that the most recent draft can take a little more work. I think we can get it ready for January 15th for introduction. We'd have to do it on January 4th. But I would recommend a little more time for the action upon 3 and 2 weeks every month. So this is a complicated subject. I'm especially interested in how enforcement is supposed to happen. I'm not really clear on how to do it.
That's a good idea. So we'll introduce it on January 15th. We'll set the public hearing for the first meeting in February.
Yeah.
That's fine. And just on the last point, and then we'll close out. I mean, it seems to me we're in this continuum, and at each level, what I mean is this: you could say there's no products. We just learned it's dangerous, and every product has it, all the way to it's being phased out and it's almost gone, or more likely somewhere in between, right? Some have it and some don't. Anywhere along that continuum, it seems like you should still say these are not very helpful, harmful chemicals that ought to get out, and we ought to take the position, delay it some to give people time. But I feel like we're in the middle position. But I hear arguments against it that this will be too harsh. There's too many of these out there, and we're not going to find alternatives. Or the alternative, it's almost done. It's unnecessary. I don't really care where we are in the middle of that process. We ought to kick it moving towards not having these. And so wherever it is, keep it moving that direction. If we're doing it and the cow is mostly out of the barn door, well, fine. But if it's not, I still want to kick it. Yeah.
Just to follow up on that, thank you, Mr. Chair. It seems to me the labeling part is almost as important as the ban, because in the labeling, and I mentioned what you said, Sue, a lot of the retailers don't know about it. A lot of the consumers don't know about it. I would not want to be buying kids' toys that have these chemicals, and I think we just don't have access to that information. We don't know.
With that, I'm going to gavel out. Thank you all for the work.